Hello, welcome to the second CVL Science Luncheon Seminar of the series, and happy Valentine's Day. Extra points to you for wearing pink. I see pink out there. Today we have the pleasure of welcoming one of our own, Dr. Colleen Frank. Colleen received her PhD in cognitive neuroscience from the Department of Psychology at the University of Michigan in April of 2021. She was also a member of the LIFE program from the Max Planck University of Michigan program, and her dissertation won, which I didn't know until I looked to write this, one of the FAB's National Dissertation Awards. So congratulations, those are very prestigious. She then moved from there to here to join us at the center to work in the Aging Well laboratory with Dr. Kendra Seaman. Today she's going to tell us about some of that award-winning dissertation research, specifically on predicting real-world feelings, the role of working memory for emotion. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Frank.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. I'm really excited to be here with all of you. Like she said, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my previous work from my doctoral kind of dissertation, and then some of kind of the follow-up and current studies that we're working on now. All right. So you might not have guessed it from the weather outside today, but about a week and a half ago, we had a winter storm Landon come through, right? It wasn't nearly as bad as what I heard last year was like in terms of power outages, but as a result, the roads were icy for a few days, making driving dangerous. Maybe you didn't want to go outside. So something many of us had to do and decide in the days that followed was, when am I going to leave my house, right? When can I reemerge into society? So something that people do when they make decisions like this and others are they predict how they will feel in the future. And let that kind of predictions and those anticipated feelings help guide their choices. So maybe I predicted that I'd feel pretty uncomfortable on the roads because maybe people aren't used to driving in ice, and therefore I decided to stay home for a day longer than other people did, right? So, gotta do my math. Nice. Okay, so we call this ability to anticipate our future feelings affective forecasting. And previous research has found that affective forecasting is important for decision making, and we actually can predict some decisions that people make based on their anticipated feelings. But we aren't actually all that accurate in this ability. And while we tend to be pretty good about predicting emotions, such as maybe predicting watching a comedy movie might elicit feelings of happiness or contentment, we tend to overestimate the intensity and the duration of our feelings, predicting that our feelings will be more intense than they actually are and last longer than they actually do. So oftentimes we predict we're going to feel worse than we end up actually feeling. Now, there's also a great deal of individual differences in this ability. So whereas you might be pretty accurate in predicting your feelings, someone else might be highly inaccurate. And if someone is basing their choices off inaccurate predictions, this can lead to suboptimal decision making. So a question that we might ask is, what makes someone an accurate predictor of their future feelings? What can explain this person-to-person variability that we see? And some previous studies have proposed that it might be due to individual differences in emotional intelligence, or other trait-like abilities like personality traits that predispose you to being a more accurate forecaster. However, during graduate school, my co-authors and I began to hypothesize that variability in forecasting may also rely on a more basic or core psychological ability that underlies forecasting. And this is affective working memory. And now affective working memory in general refers to the ability to hold information at the forefront of our minds for a short period of time. There's evidence that there are slightly distinct processes for maintaining different kinds of information, like visual spatial, so remembering words or numbers or locations, images or locations, and verbal, such as remembering letters and numbers and things like that. So there's also a proposed domain of working memory that is specifically responsible for holding our emotions in the forefront of our mind. And this ability to maintain feeling states is called affective working memory. Now, affective working memory doesn't refer to just any emotional information being held in mind. So, for example, you can maintain the image of a happy event or something like that, or words that elicit happiness and things like that. But that's not what I mean when I say affective working memory. Affective working memory would refer to holding the actual feeling state of happiness in mind. And we hypothesized that similar to cognitive working memory, providing the mental workspace for a lot of higher order cognitive functioning, that affective working memory may provide the mental workspace for higher order emotional processing. So that can occur, including affective forecasting. So during forecasting, individuals are conjuring up how they're going to feel in the future, such as how maybe eating a burger or a salad for lunch may make them feel. They're evaluating those feelings. They may compare it to other conjured up feelings and ultimately use these predictions when making their choice. Therefore, we hypothesize that accurate forecasting may be supported by this ability to hold emotions in mind in the present. That is affective working memory. So a better ability to maintain feelings in the present may support more accurate predictions of the future feelings. So across several studies, we tested the hypothesis that affective forecasting ability relies specifically on our working memory for emotion, or affective working memory. And if this is true, that individual differences in our ability to maintain emotional experiences should explain the variability of the accuracy of a person's forecasts. Therefore, we expected that if someone had a better ability to maintain feeling states, they would be more accurate in their predictions of future feelings. And of course, a worse ability would then lead to less accurate predictions. However, we predicted that affective working memory would be unique in its ability to explain variability in forecasting accuracy. So we predicted that the ability to hold other non-affective information in mind more generally would not account for an individual's forecasting accuracy. So to test this, we measured affective forecasting accuracy. We also assessed participants' abilities to maintain emotions and to maintain non-affective information. And then to see if these affective and non-affective working memory abilities could predict how accurate an individual's forecasts are. So first I'm going to describe the measures that we used. So to measure affective forecasting, we used a description-based affective forecasting measure adapted from Robinson and Clore, where in phase 1, participants read descriptions of emotionally evocative scenes and photographs and predict how they would feel if they were to view the image. So they may read something like, this scene shows 2 young girls on a sled bundled up in winter attire. They're preparing to slide down a snowy hill. Then they would be asked to predict how you would feel if you were to view this image. So participants would rate their feelings using an analog scale that ranges from extremely unpleasant to extremely pleasant. The absolute resolution was -10 to +10. So go ahead and you can make that prediction in your mind right now. You can just use a 0 to 10 from extremely unpleasant to extremely pleasant. So then participants come back 1 week later, typically in our studies, after a delay, and then they view the images that were described. So such as this image here, and then they rate how the picture makes them feel using the same scale. You did it just a moment before, so you might be more accurate because you're remembering your previous prediction, right? So that's one of the reasons we use this delay and a visual analog scale rather than a kind of a numerical scale, just because it reduces the chance that someone will just remember what they had predicted before. So then to calculate the score, we first calculate the error or the absolute difference between the expected or the predicted and the experienced ratings. And then to calculate accuracy, we subtract the absolute error from that maximum score or the maximum discrepancy. And for this case, it's 10. So basically a higher forecasting score closer to 10 means a more accurate prediction or less error, whereas closer to further from 10, closer to 0, the worse the prediction. And so these were averaged across 10 scenes, 5 of them positive and 5 of them negative. So now to measure affective working memory or the working memory for emotion, we needed to measure the ability to maintain emotional experience. So we used an emotion maintenance task that was created for this purpose. And this looked something like this. So participants participants see one emotional image, and they're asked to experience the feelings evoked from the picture. The images that were used were from the International Affective Picture System, which have been rated by a national sample, several national samples at this point, on the intensity and the valence and the likelihood that they will evoke emotion. So they were selected to do just that, to evoke emotion. So then what participants do is they hold the emotional reaction in mind evoked from that first image at the same intensity level. So that is, they try and maintain the feeling evoked from that picture and keep it at the forefront of their minds at the same intensity. So essentially the feeling that they got from that first picture, they're asked to keep holding on to that feeling and keep experiencing it in this kind of interim, this delay. They then view another emotional image, and participants are then asked to experience the feelings from this image. And then participants are asked to respond, were the feelings evoked, did the second picture evoke more or less emotional intensity compared to the first? So in this case, they're responding to the question, did the sunset image evoke more feelings with more or less emotional intensity than the feelings evoked by the peer picture? So participants do this for a set of positive and negative matched valence pairs of emotional images. And by maintaining a feeling evoked by the first image, they decide if the second image evoked more or less emotional intensity. Now, how do you score a task like this? Well, after participants complete the maintenance task, they complete a separate rating task where they view each image individually. And they can click anywhere on the scale to indicate the degree of intensity of their feelings. So we just ask, how intense were your feelings evoked by this image? We then can calculate individualized accuracy scores for the maintenance task by determining how each person should have responded during each trial. So let's just pretend that the scale down here corresponds between a 0 and a 10, where 0 is not intense and 10 is extremely intense. If we take a hypothetical participant, and for this pair, the rating of the emotion intensity of the peer corresponds to a 4 out of 10, and the rating of a sunset corresponds to a 9 out of 10. So during the rating task, they rated the sunset as having more emotion intensity or a higher strength of an emotional reaction. So then, if we look back at the trial during the maintenance task, since 9 is greater than 4, when asked if the second picture had more or less emotional intensity during this trial, the hypothetical participant should have responded more. And then we can look to see their response, to see what did they actually say for that trial. If they did respond more, they would get a point for that trial for being consistent. That for just a minute here. A point for being consistent, or if they responded less, they would not get a point because they were inconsistent. And we then average the points across all of the trials to create an emotion maintenance accuracy score for each participant. We've also done this with normative ratings. We have a database of people rating the intensity of the IOS images. However, we feel that a lot of times the individualized accuracy, it allows for individual differences. So if someone has a very big fear of snakes, right, then that might matter when we're actually looking at it versus a snake owner, right? So this allows us to kind of use their own personal ratings for the scoring. However, when we do it both ways, we find very similar things. So this is what we tend to use. Okay, so now to establish the unique properties of affective working memory, the original authors had created a comparison task that shared many of the parameters, but focuses just on the maintenance of perceptual information using brightness intensity. So for this task, participants view pairs of neutral images and are asked to experience and maintain the brightness intensity, or the brightness of the first image in mind over a delay, and decide if subsequent image has more or less brightness intensity than the first. And brightness intensity is described as the overall amount of light or illumination in the image, regardless of what is in the actual picture. And this task is a suitable comparison task because it's also a delayed response task that matches the stimuli. It also uses photos from the IOS database, and it asks for responses based on a subjective experience that varies in intensity. So a lot of the more canonical or popular working memory tasks might have you remember numbers or letters or locations, but that is so distinct from the affective working memory task that we wanted to make sure that the differences that we find between them were actually due to the differences in processes or hypothesized processes rather than just the task differences. So this is why this is used. It's scored in a very similar way. So just how we have them do the emotion maintenance or the emotion intensity rating, we also have them do brightness intensity rating separately after the maintenance task. And so for this one, let's say a hypothetical participant rated the brightness intensity of the car as an 8 out of 10 and the bike a 3 out of 10, meaning the car had more brightness intensity when rated independently. So when asked during the maintenance task if the bike had higher or lower emotional intensity or brightness intensity, they should have said less. And then the accuracy scores were calculated in the same way as the emotion intensity. Okay. So there are 4 studies I'll be talking about today investigating this relationship that kind of build on one another. So in study 1A, the goal was to test the relationship between affective forecasting and affective working memory. We predicted that the ability to maintain emotion would significantly predict affective forecast or forecasting accuracy. So participants completed 2 sessions spaced 1 week apart, where they did the emotion maintenance and forecasting tasks. In this study, they did not do the brightness maintenance task. That's in our next one. And additionally, in studies 1 through 3, participants also completed an additional measure of self-reported vividness of visual imagery. So we included this because the nature of our forecasting task, where we're asking people to predict how they will feel based on these scenes. An alternative hypothesis is that if someone is more accurate in their predictions, it could just be that that person is better at visualizing scenes in their head or better at visual imagery. So we measured this vividness of visual imagery, and if this were the case, then we would expect that a better imaging ability would also predict how accurate forecasts are. But when we look at all the studies together, we find that visual imagery does not predict the accuracy of our description-based forecasts. So I'm not going to go into more detail about that, but I did just want to note that it was measured and it was included in our analyses. Okay. So in study 1A, we had 66 participants, and we ran a multiple linear regression with forecasting accuracy as the outcome variable, and emotion maintenance, task performance, as well as the visual imagery ability, as I mentioned before, as the predictors. And forecasting accuracy is from a 0 to 10 score, where 10 is the highest accuracy, and emotion. So here the mean is 7.5. It's towards the more accurate side, but it is definitely less than the perfect predictions. And then forecasting accuracy is between 0 and 1. Okay, so just to orient you to the graph, you'll see that, let's see this again. Okay, you'll see that affective forecasting ability is on the y-axis, and the emotion maintenance task accuracy is on the x-axis. In the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see the standardized beta value and the p-value for the emotion maintenance task as a predictor from our regression. And this is showing that people who are better able to maintain affective feelings over a short delay are also more accurate in their predictions of how they will feel in the future. And in the bottom center, just our other predictor, like I said, won't be mentioning too much. So from this initial experiment, it appears that emotion maintenance task performance is related to forecasting accuracy. However, we wanted to investigate whether this association was specific to maintaining feeling states, or affective working memory, or if it was related to maintenance abilities more generally or more broadly. So is the ability to maintain emotional experiences, is it that it is the ability to maintain emotional experiences that's predictive of affective forecasting? Or is it just the ability to hold information in mind or working memory more broadly? That is, would the ability to hold information that are not feelings also predict forecasting accuracy? So that brings us to study 1B, which is our second study, where a new sample of participants completed the brightness maintenance task previously described as our measure of non-affective working memory or non-affective maintenance. They also did the description-based affective forecasting task. Everything else in the protocol was identical, including the visual imagery measures was the same, just in a new sample of participants. Yes?
Can I ask who the participants were?
Yes, they were undergraduates, college.
Okay.
Yeah, from subject pool. Yep. And that's the case for most of the studies until I tell you differently, because at the end we do branch out. But in this study, they did not do the emotion maintenance test. Okay, so in study 1B, we had 68 participants, and once again, we ran a multiple linear regression with visual imagery, and this time brightness maintenance as predictors of forecasting accuracy. So here, on the graph, the forecasting once again is on the y-axis, and the brightness maintenance is on the x, and the standardized beta and p-values bottom right. As predicted, we did not find a significant relationship between affective forecasting and brightness maintenance. But if you notice, just looking at the data, it appears to be trending toward a positive association. But I am going to show you this time and time again where there's an absence of a significant relationship between brightness maintenance and forecasting accuracy. It's consistently seen, but if the claim makes you uncomfortable when I say it's not significant right now, and I completely understand, so you just hang tight and we'll get there. Yes, so if we look at them together, it indicates that emotion maintenance performance might predict individual differences in forecasting accuracy, but this may not be the case for non-affective maintenance. However, we believe these relationships would really be best compared if they were within the same group of individuals. So that brings us to study 2. However, just let's summarize the findings in study 1A. In support of our hypothesis, we found that the ability to hold emotion intensity in mind predicts accuracy of affective forecasts, where in study 1B, we find that the ability to maintain brightness information does not. Okay, so in study 2, we used a within subject design attempting to replicate the findings from study 1. And this has the advantage of allowing us to include performance on both the emotion maintenance and brightness maintenance tasks as predictors in our regression model, which lets us statistically account for the unique contributions of each maintenance ability while holding the other one constant. So in this study, participants completed both maintenance tasks and the description-based forecasting measure. And based on the findings from study 1, we hypothesized that performance on the brightness maintenance task wouldn't predict forecasting accuracy, whereas performance on the emotion maintenance task would. And additionally, to maximize efficiency and be able to include all of the tasks that we wanted, we selected a subset of the maintenance task pairs used in study 1. We used an item response theory analysis to identify the pairs from study 1 with the highest discrimination scores. That is, those are the most diagnostic of maintenance abilities. So these are the pairs that should have the greatest ability to tell from the high performers from the low performers. And I'm not going to go into too much detail, but if you have questions about the IRT, let me know. Okay, so in study 2, we had 96 participants, also young adults, undergraduates. Here's a table of the means for the major tasks. And for our primary analysis, we again ran a multiple linear regression with visual imagery, ability, performance on emotion maintenance, and brightness maintenance tasks as predictors of forecasting accuracy. So on the left, once again, is the relationship between emotion maintenance and affective forecasting. The ability to maintain emotional intensity is a significant predictor, once again, of forecasting accuracy, such that people who are better able to maintain affective feelings over a short delay are more accurate in predicting how they will feel in the future. However, on the right, you can see brightness maintenance accuracy on the X. This was not the case for maintaining brightness information. But if you notice, just looking at the figure, it's not significant. It still appears that that relationship on the right between maintaining brightness intensity and forecasting accuracy might be trending toward a positive association. So this is the second time that we've seen that it's not significant. I also understand that it doesn't necessarily look unrelated. So our next step was really to further explore the relationship between non-affective memory, working memory, and forecasting accuracy. So we can update our results slide to include those from study 2. We found the same pattern as before, that maintaining emotion but not brightness intensity predicts forecasting accuracy, but we want to further explore that relationship with non-affective working memory. So now in study 3, we ran a pre-registered replication and extension of the previous work. And so participants completed most of the same measures, but this time we included 2 additional, more widely used measures of visual spatial working memory. We used a Corsi block tapping task and a visual change detection task. Again, we used a subset of the maintenance pairs from the original studies in 1A and 1B. Although the subset was similar to those in study 2, they're slightly different. We modified the selection in an attempt to match the mean accuracy scores between emotion maintenance and brightness maintenance. So if you notice, just in study 2, they're slightly different. One is 0.81, one is 0.85. We wanted to see if we could get those to match. Yes?
Are these residualized plots?
No.
So what happens when you put them in the same model?
They are in the same model. Sorry. But this is the graph is raw data, but they are in the same model. So this is the relationship with motion maintenance and forecasting accuracy, while brightness maintenance is in the model. So controlling for brightness maintenance ability.
Okay, I'm confused. Wouldn't that then be a residual plot? You'd have to plot the residuals.
And also you can't control for the other variable unless you're covariating it. So it's not a stepwise regression. You're just saying both the variables are there.
Yeah.
And so your overall F of the model is just saying both variables together. Predicts.
Yeah, but when you're looking at the individual predictors, are we not only looking at one predictor while holding the other?
No, it's not holding the other. And this is stepwise regression.
Okay.
So I guess my question, another way of putting it, is what's the partial correlation coefficient on the left, where when you remove the variance that's shared with brightness maintenance?
Yes. Okay, we do report that in the paper, and I have that in other slides. I do not have it here. But we have done that, and the partial correlation for emotion maintenance and affective forecasting is there, whereas the brightness maintenance controlling is not there. So we do run partial correlations. I'm sorry.
That's the standard, if that's the beta weight from the model, though, that's what that is, right? So 0.33 would serve to answer your question, right?
It's not partial.
Depends whether it's the.
It has to be covariated out, and it's not covariated out. It's just straight variance.
Okay. Okay, so for study 3, the table of means for this one, primary analysis, again, with our regression, predictors included the brightness maintenance, the visual imagery, and then the 2 additional measures of visual spatial working memory. So, on the left here, again, is maintaining the intensity of emotions, once again, significantly predicts forecasting accuracy, whereas maintaining brightness intensity does not. So this is the 3rd time that we've now seen this same pattern of results. We'll notice now that we did match the accuracy scores, and the graph on the right seems to be just more distinct from the previous 2. Yes, I'm just gonna give you a second to look at this one. Okay, so then let's turn our attention to the other 2 visual spatial working memory tasks, the Corsi and the change detection. So on the left, we're just looking at the Corsi block tapping task related to forecasting accuracy. We see that this was not a significant predictor of forecasting accuracy. However, on the right, change detection originally did predict affective forecasting in the regression model, but this did not hold true when tested separately. So neither just in a regular correlation, and definitely not when we do partial correlations accounting for the other variables. So because change detection only predicts forecasting in the presence of other predictors, it doesn't seem to independently predict forecasting. Also, this relationship is in the opposite direction than we would expect. So this has lower working memory scores predicting more accurate forecasts, further supporting the idea that change detection doesn't uniquely predict forecasting. One of the reasons that we think this might have happened is because of collinearity. Just because we know that the Corsi block tapping and change detection are correlated with one another because they're both visual spatial working memory tasks. And including them both in the model can cause things to happen that we wouldn't necessarily see when they're tested separately. but we can talk about that more if you have any questions on that. Okay, so in study 3, we replicated the previously identified relationship between forecasting accuracy and affective working memory. We also find that performance on 2 additional widely used measures of visual working memory don't independently explain variability in forecasting accuracy beyond the variability explained by affective working memory. I do want to be clear that this is not to say that working memory doesn't necessarily play a role in forecasting or in any types of thing. Working memory is a very broad core construct that relates to a lot of our functioning. So it's not, I'm not saying that it doesn't use any visual working memory. I'm just saying that based on our findings, we can't say that it doesn't explain the variability or the individual differences in forecasting accuracy. So I'm not saying that working memory is not important, just that it can't explain the specific differences that we're seeing, whereas affective working memory is. Okay, so from this first 3 studies in 315 participants, all young adults, we find a reliable relationship between the ability to hold feelings in mind, affective working memory, and affective forecasting. However, we find that this relationship is unique to affective and not visual working memory, which across the 3 measures did not independently account for variability in the accuracy of forecasts. But something that came up when we were interpreting these findings was that affective forecasting is something we actually do in the real world. We constantly are making predictions of our future feelings when we're making decisions, but we were measuring it in the laboratory trying to simulate forecasting. But there are other commonly used forecasting measures that incorporate real life events. So we felt that the next step would be to document this relationship using a measure of forecasting that more realistically simulates real life predictions. Therefore, we used the United States 2020 presidential election. So elections have been used in affective forecasting studies for a long time. Pretty much every kind of both local and national elections, there's usually about 1 study at least published on these elections. They're a common one just because they have a lot of significance and emotional significance, and it's a good way to be able to test that. So in study 4, we assessed in another pre-registered study whether that relationship identified in studies 1 through 3 generalizes to a new measure of forecasting using the election. So let me just first describe that new forecasting measure. So in this measure, we adapted from Lynch et al. In 2019. Participants in phase 1 read that suppose it is an evening in November 2020 and Joe Biden has won the election. Please predict how you will be feeling about Joe Biden being the next president of the United States. They also did this for the same thing for the other major party candidate, Donald Trump. And for both of them, after reading each blurb, they predicted the extent that they would feel happy, scared, and angry on 3 scales ranging from not at all to extremely. And these scales were out of 21, absolute resolution. So then in phase 2, once sources called the election in favor of Joe Biden, which in 2020, if you remember, it was a few days after the election, participants then read, it has been announced that Joe Biden has won the election. How do you feel about Joe Biden being the next president of the United States? And then again, they reported how happy, angry, or scared they felt about it using those same scales. So to score this task, we use a similar formula as our description-based, but this time we subtract that absolute difference. From a maximum score for this one is 21, not 10, and the score is based on an average of all 3 of the emotions, happy, sad, and angry, and the negative scores were reverse coded just for consistency. Okay, so in study 4, participants also completed the emotion maintenance and brightness maintenance tasks. We included the description-based task that was used in previous work. And unlike the prior studies, which were all conducted in person with college students run in a laboratory, thanks to the pandemic, study 4 was conducted entirely online with young adult participants recruited nationwide. So I think we had a total of participants from about 32 of the 50 states. So not quite there, but it was a broad group. And so we used Prolific to recruit participants. And so we hypothesized that once again, that ability to maintain emotion intensity would still predict forecasting accuracy in this new sample of internet-based participants and for forecasting on this real-life world election measure. But that maintaining brightness would not. So we had 76 participants in this study. Again, here's a table of the means for the major measures and the previous, and this is for the election outcome. So like similar to the previous, we used a multiple linear regression. Forecasting accuracy is the outcome variable, what we're trying to predict. Maintenance test performance as the predictors. We also included covariates that accounted for individual variation in the time lag between sessions. Since they weren't coming in, participants had a little bit of flexibility on when in a few days. So we wanted to make sure that that wasn't correlating or accounting for several things. They had forecasting accuracy. And again, here are the means. The election outcome forecasting is out of 21, not 10, just if we're comparing for the other ones. And so again, emotion maintenance and affective forecasting is on the left. And we see that same pattern as in previous work emerge such that maintaining emotion significantly accounts for variability in forecasting accuracy, such that a better affective working memory predicts more accurate forecasting, even when predicting feelings about the outcome of a real world event, such as an election. On the other hand, if we look at, on the right-hand side, maintaining brightness intensity does not predict forecasting accuracy on this measure. Okay. So now if we're looking at the description-based study, we can look at, again, at table of our means. Again, the description-based forecasting is out of 10. It's very similar, the error in terms of our mean accuracy. The maintenance tasks are both lower in terms of than what we have seen in person, but they're not completely outside of the realm of what has been found in previous work. We've found similar things in certain studies as well. So then we also want to see if their other relationship remained in this new internet-based sample. So we ran another regression with these description-based forecasting as the outcome variable and maintenance test performance as the predictors. Again, this is pretty much the exact same setup as studies 1 through 3. The only difference was that it was administered online. And so on the left, we see the same pattern as before, that performance on the emotion maintenance task predicts description-based forecasting accuracy, such that a better ability to maintain emotional experiences predicts more accurate forecasts. But as you can see on the right, this is not the same for brightness maintenance, which does not significantly predict forecasting accuracy. So this replicates some of the previous results in a new sample tested via the internet. So we see that the findings with description-based forecasting replicate even when tested with a internet-based sample, and the selective relationship between forecasting and maintaining emotions extends to a measure of real-world forecasting. Okay, so for conclusions, this work provides evidence that the ability to maintain and work with emotions, affective working memory, predicts forecasting accuracy not only on a description-based task administered in the laboratory or online, but also for a major real-world event as significant as a national election. So the findings make progress towards understanding and explaining variability in real-world forecasting and elucidating its underlying mechanisms. And it also supports the proposal that affective working memory is a fundamental ability that, like other forms of working memory, varies across individuals and plays a key role in higher order psychological processes like emotional prospection and potentially other forms of social cognition. So as a key takeaway, if we bring it back to our schematic, in support of our hypothesis, it does appear that maintaining feelings in the present, in what we call affective working memory, plays a significant role in how we imagine our feelings about the future or affective forecasting, even when those predicted feelings are about a real world event. Okay, so in the last few minutes, I'm just going to shift gears and tell you a little bit about some of the follow-up studies that we're working on. And many of these kind of stem from my interest in aging and how we can kind of incorporate this into that realm. So it probably comes as no surprise to really any of you that our world is rapidly aging, and as such, we have a growing number of older adults. And older adults in particular face some of the most consequential financial and healthcare decisions among the population. Now, despite robust reports of cognitive decline, some of our decision-making capabilities have been seen to remain intact or appear similar to those of younger adults. And one idea as to why this might be the case is because emotions have been found to be important in decision making, and much of our emotional processing remains largely intact in older age. So I'm interested in the role that these spared emotion-related processes play in the preservation and the changes in decision-making capabilities in older age. So the accuracy of our predictions of future feelings, this forecasting has been seen to remain intact or even improve in older age, at least for positive events. So this is absolute error from one study, and this is looking at showing that for negative, across the lifespan, for negative events, we tend to maybe get a little slightly less accurate, where error is increasing. But for positive events, this is with a significant relationship that we tend to improve or become more accurate in our predictions. So I want to understand the role of affective forecasting in decision-making changes in older age, and that might be because affective forecasting is becoming even more important. So to do so in collaboration with Torsten Pakur at the Max Planck Institute for Human Development, we're comparing how older and younger adults use these predictions of future feelings when making choices. And additionally, we're comparing how that differs depending on when the decision is affect-rich, that is eliciting really strong emotions, versus affect-poor, those that elicit less of an emotional reaction. So we just collected data for that. I was over there for the summer to kind of work with this, and so now we have the data, and I'm working on analyzing that using some computational modeling methods. Additionally, since we know that affective forecasting might at least remain partially intact, at least for positive events, since I just described that affective working memory is a hypothesized mechanism underlying forecasting variability, we may also want to look at how the ability to maintain emotional experiences changes across the lifespan. So there's been one study by Michaels in 2005 that found initial evidence that working memory for non-affective information declines in older age, but working memory for emotion does not. However, this was just one study, and they used the same tasks. So the brightness, for the emotion maintenance, younger and older adults were performing very similarly, whereas for the brightness, older adults were performing worse compared to the younger adults. But this was just one study that investigated this. It used extreme age groups of, I think, 18 to 28 and 65 plus. So I'm working with my collaborators from the University of Michigan to run a study that examines these affective and non-affective maintenance abilities across the entire adult lifespan from ages like 18 to 80, and kind of seeing if these have divergent trajectories, what do those trajectories look like across the lifespan? And then eventually we might want to relate it back to affective forecasting to see kind of how that plays a role and how that relationship between affective forecasting and affective working memory changes as we age. And then finally, I'm of course working with Dr. Seaman here at the CVL to examine affective mechanisms of risky decision making in older adults. So many of our different kinds of decisions that we make and gambles we make in our lives, they have different types. There are, depending on how they're framed, there are different types of gambles or decisions that we make, including positively skewed, symmetric, and negatively skewed. Examples of the positively skewed gambles are like lottery tickets, where there's a small chance of winning a big amount and a big chance of losing money, right? And we find that as we get older, people prefer these positively biased gambles even more. We always kind of like them, these positive or the lottery type gambles, but as we get older, we like them even more. We prefer them, and so there's kind of a skew towards the positive bias as we get older. And so we are looking at the mechanisms that may explain why this may be occurring, by looking at how the memory for and attention to positive information in gambles of this type might play a role in decisions across the lifespan. And with that, I just want to thank all of you and my current lab, the Aging Well Lab, for all of their feedback, and my current advisor, and then my collaborators and previous mentors from the University of Michigan and my collaborators. So, thank you.
Thank you. I have a question that I promise I thought of before you showed your current studies that
Okay.
you're working on. So when you did the presidential thing, I was wondering if you looked, in addition to averaging across the three, like
Mhm.
scared, happy, angry, if you looked to see if there was an interaction, like the type of emotion was differentially prone to like maintenance, decay, or failure, or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I would think if you were scared that someone was going to be president and then, then they weren't, that might have different come down range or what, you know what I mean? Versus
Yeah.
happier. And you have the data. So I just want
We do have the data. Yeah, we have not looked at that.
yeah, you could
That
test
manuscript we just submitted, but
you could test for an interaction
Yeah.
in addition to averaging them. See if
Yeah,
it turns
I think
out.
that might be a good idea, just because we know that different emotions have kind of different effects, especially with forecasting. So we tend to be less accurate with these negative. We tend to kind of overestimate how negative we'll feel. So yeah, I think that might be it. That would be good.
So the data are really consistent, very convincing. But I'm not
That's okay.
I'm not trying to down with faint phrasing. I mean, it's quite clear that there's something about that effective working memory task that's predictive of people's ability to be consistent in their predictions. But I'm curious as to why it's thought to be a working memory task. So if I understand it correctly, you get a picture, then you wait a bit, and then you get another picture, and you have to say which way round, which has got the more intense emotion. So to call that you use the terminology maintenance. The implication is that the reason that people get it wrong, so to speak, compared to when they do the independent ratings, is that there's a maintenance failure. They're forgetting what they rated, what the original emotion was. So I see that sunset and I think it's very beautiful. But over however long the delay period is, I lose that information. And that would be the kind of working memory interpretation. But why isn't it actually simply telling us about how well calibrated people are and how consistent they are in assigning the same emotional intensity to a picture? So the alternative account of your data are just that people who are called people with low effective working memory are people who are inconsistent in how they allocated emotional intensity to pictures. So if you're inconsistent, then you'll get exactly the same data. Wouldn't that be more understandable as a mechanism by which you get differences in effective forecasting? So, I get a description of two kids on a sled, I should say here, and I imagine that picture and I give it a rating. Then when I see the picture, I give it a rating again. Well, it's the same thing. I could be consistent or I could be inconsistent. So why invoke the concept of working memory? Why isn't this just measuring how stable people are in their assignment of an emotional rating to a picture?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there's been some neuroimaging work that looks at kind of the differences between just passively viewing versus actively maintaining the thing. So I think one of the main things is that we have to make sure that our participants are actually doing the task correctly. So I think because if they're not actually holding on to that feeling in mind, I think then it becomes more consistency, because if they're not doing the task, it is actually quite a difficult task to do. It's mentally fatiguing. But I think the neuroimaging evidence might be the most consistent is that, as well as, yes, okay, so the neuroimaging evidence finds that there are distinctions between the maintenance process for the images versus just purely viewing the process, purely viewing the image. Recruits brain areas that are both associated with just the emotional experiences, as well as the DLPFC and things that are actually distinct from just viewing. There's also been work on using selective interference methodology. So whereas if they do, they cannot do another subsequent task during it. And so for the brightness intensity, they use kind of an articulatory suppression. For the emotion maintenance task, they use another emotion processing cognitive emotion regulation task, and there's this distinct double dissociation where you can do the task, you can do the emotion maintenance task fine as long as it's with the cognitive interference, but not with the emotional interference. So that, to me, tells me that there's something going on that it can be interfered with rather than just that. But I think that's a plausible.
So I don't want to prolong this other than to say, I'm not suggesting for a moment that you don't need to maintain something over time. I'm just saying, if you maintain over time a badly calibrated emotional bracket, then it's not going to predict how you're going to make that rating later.
Okay.
So what you've said is, I have no trouble with that at all. It's just that it's not a failure of what's being maintained over time that's giving rise to your results. It's the inconsistency of the original rating that's given to the stimulus.
Okay. I think, so are you talking about like reliability in terms of how much they rate the images? Because we also have looked at that as an alternative explanation as the how often the test retest reliability, and we find that to be very high. So we have them just rate the images twice, and we actually look at that. So that was actually one of our just kind of a mini study during the pandemic, is saying, okay, let's have these participants rate them, and they are very consistent with the ratings. But I think there are probably individuals who are less consistent, and maybe there's something going on with that. But yeah, someone on my committee, John Janice, he had the same point. Yes.
So I was just going to compliment what Mick was saying. So many of us would argue working memory is not just maintenance and short-term memory, because the kind of maintenance that you're talking about over a week or 2 weeks can easily transition from working memory to episodic memory. For many of us who believe that there are shared processes between these short-term and long-term memory. There is no capacity or manipulation or the traditional, coordination of information and switching back and forth and jumping between them, which defines working memory. So that was my.
Yeah, I think that's very.
It's easier to say memory maintenance without putting a label of short-term, long-term.
Yes.
I was curious about the brightness thing, the visual imagery, sorry. So in many of these models, the visual imagery was an important and significant variable, right? Even for, like at least for the last study where you had all the two, I mean, not last, fifth study, but third study.
Yes.
It was a within subject design. But in some cases, I don't remember offhand it was significant or not.
It wasn't. So it was very inconsistently significant. Yes. Yeah. So that was interesting to us, that sometimes it would be significant, sometimes it wouldn't. So that's why we ran the analysis with every participant who did all of the forecasting. And so that was 315 participants, and we did not find a relationship with all of the participants. But it was kind of weird that it was varied, because I know that is something that is hypothesized, and I think it was important to include for the type of task that we were using. Yeah.
Questions from the room?
I had just a comment about the real life application when you did the presidential election study. So with something like that, did you not think that maybe, because your other studies you have people looking at images and then they have the data and they have to see the images, so it was subjective, it was quite controlled. With the presidential election, they had so many, it was probably their feelings were reinforced so many times because it was constantly on the news and everywhere, everybody was talking about it all the time. So you wouldn't be able to really test their memory of what they had said in the first part of the study, because between that there would have been many opportunities for them to have those feelings reinforced and remind them, I guess, I don't want this person to win, or I do want this. So how would you know if you're really looking at, their working memory for that event? It's probably been rehearsed, and those feelings have been reinforced quite often in that delay period.
Yeah. So the working memory component is only at the time of prediction that we're asking, is that when they're predicting how they will feel, they're conjuring up these feelings, they're evaluating them, and then they're comparing them to kind of and making their estimate. So the working memory, or the kind of short-term maintenance portion of it, is really just at that time. And the idea is that if you're better able to kind of have this mental workspace that is supporting this ability, that is what's predicting, then you're able to make a more accurate prediction. If you cannot hold emotions in mind, then how are you supposed to make an accurate prediction when you're trying to conjure up these emotions? So that part is just in the prediction phase. I think what you're saying about them consistently having there's a lot of loss of control when you get, it's constantly on the news. It's 24-hour coverage basically, right? That might have definitely responded to the actual rating of the feeling, and that could interpret because people eventually start to kind of rationalize and things like that. We just kind of followed what other studies have done in the past in terms of, we sent the survey right out after it was called essentially, and then people responded, had maybe 1 or 2 days to respond. So we did the best we could, but there was a delay of a much longer time, like the 2 or I think about 3 weeks in terms of that, yeah.
I think that's what helps the ecological validity though, because that's what happens in real life. You have a thought or a feeling or whatever. It's moved around all over the place as a stream of information comes through. And so it's almost like the interference maybe that,
yeah.
Although this is such a
I was going to say, would like to think
bias,
that people seek out the information that reinforces
Yes,
it.
absolutely.
Yes,
There's a lot of stability within that area,
That's true.
especially towards the end.
Everyone has their own echo chamber.
Yeah.
Yes, and it was good though that we did have people from kind of all sides and that all had different preferences, and we did only include people pretty much with a clear preference for one of the candidates or another. So they had to at least have positive feelings about one of the candidate while they have negative feelings about another candidate, because otherwise, how can they flip if they don't care about either way?
Surely that wasn't hard. Surely that wasn't.
No, because it was a pretty polarizing election. Yes. Yeah.
Do we have questions from the online audience?
No questions at this time.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for sharing that research with us.